Hi, I'm Dana Shoaf, editor of Civil War Times Magazine, and I'm back with Melissa Wynn, director of photography, for our last First Monday's Facebook Live broadcast for November. We're standing in a very unusual location because our topic for this talk took a lot of research to track down, and it ended up in this really very unusual location. We are in an abandoned cemetery with 18th century origins, not far from Poolesville, Maryland. Poolesville, Maryland is in southern Frederick County, right along the Potomac River. And if you've traveled Route 15, the bridge that carries Route 15 over the Potomac River is very close to Poolesville. Right across the river is, of course, Virginia. So I can't really give you a specific location. The property owner knows that we're here. This is private property, but at one point it was a family cemetery plot. And Melissa is going to pan slowly around. You'll see this overgrown and abandoned cemetery, and you can see the condition of some of the stones that are in here. And if you bring it back to me, I hope you can see those. There are dozens of stones here. You can't see them because of the underbrush. And further back, there are 18th century stones. There's a woman that was born in the 1730s who died in the 1790s buried here. But we are here because of the gravestone of a young 19-year-old named Samuel Calvin Lamar. And I'm going to tell you his story. I found out about his story when I purchased these documents from a collector for my small Civil War collection. These are 4 testimonials from men about an incident that took place on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, which runs near here, or it did historically, and the tracks still run in the same location not far from here. This incident happened on July 21st, 1861, the same day as the Battle of First Bull Run or Manassas, whatever you prefer, of course, deeper in Virginia. And on that day, there were about 10 men on a railroad handcart, one of those handcarts that you see that you work by hand. And they were heading from Poolesville, Maryland after work to the village of Adamstown, Maryland, just north of here, where they all generally lived. They had all been drinking, and all this information, again, comes out of these testimonials. Most of it. They all had been drinking beer and whiskey. They're cranking along like they've done dozens of other times before, but this time is a little different because they run into a picket line of soldiers from the 1st New Hampshire Infantry, a 3-month regiment that had just joined the service in May of 1861. Soldiers from the 1st New Hampshire stop that handcart and try to take the men off of it and commandeer it for their own use, and an argument breaks out. One of the men involved in the argument is named Thomas Harwood. He's arguing with the soldiers, and one New Hampshire soldier in particular named Samuel Webster pulls out a revolver and fires it at Harwood but misses him. Things then temporarily calm down, but they become heated again when the soldiers once again try to take the handcart. One young man on the handcart, Samuel Calvin Lamar, 19 years old, says to Webster, who's brandishing his pistol, "Shoot and be damned, you don't scare me." Webster pulls out his pistol, shoots Lamar through the head, and he drops dead to the ground. The other men on the handcart begin to demonstrate with these New Hampshire soldiers, begging them to let them put Lamar on the handcart so that he can go to a surgeon, and Webster says, "Let the son of a bitch lie there and die." By this point, the lieutenant commanding the picket line, a man by the name of William Greeley, shows up, arrests Webster, puts him under arrest, and takes control of the situation, and took down these testimonials from 4 men that were on that handcart. And I'm going to read you their names. I didn't want to make mistakes with these names. He read testimonials by John Crown, Curtis Wheeler, Charles Brady, and George Brady, and they were all from nearby Adamstown, and they testify as to what happened here. And so Webster is put under arrest by Greeley. If you go to the National Archives, like we did, his service record said placed on civil arrest July 22nd, 1861. He will be held in jail in Frederick, Maryland until November, when he's put on trial and acquitted, which isn't that surprising. because he's a Union soldier in a Union-controlled area. So he's acquitted. Now, we tracked all this down because this story was so interesting to us. But it gets even more interesting when we started to study the men that were on that handcart with the murdered Lamar. John Crown, Charles Brady, and Thomas Harwood, the man that was shot at, all went across the river and joined Colonel Elijah White's 35th Battalion Virginia Cavalry, otherwise known as White's Comanches. They will cross the river and fight with the Confederacy. And you can't help but wonder if the incident here pushed their allegiance in that direction. John Crown, one of the testimonials, will be captured on September 15th, 1863. He's sent to Fort McHenry for processing, and then to the Point Lookout prison in Maryland. And eventually he'll be exchanged because he's so sick. He'll spend the rest of the war in a Richmond hospital, but he'll survive the war. Curtis Wheeler, who was interviewed, we don't know what happened to him. Charles Brady also joined the 35th Battalion Virginia Cavalry, seems to survive the war without incident. Thomas Harwood, who Webster first shot at, joins the 35th Battalion, and he will be captured at the very famous June 9th, 1863 Battle of Brandy Station, which of course White's Comanches fought at. The commander of the picket post, William Greeley, the Union lieutenant, will muster out with the 1st New Hampshire in August of 1861 with the rest of the regiment and immediately join the 11th U.S. Regulars as an officer. He joins the regular army, and he fights with the regular army throughout the war until October of 1864, when he's wounded in his forehead an inch above his right eye at the Battle of Peebles Farm outside of Petersburg, Virginia. He will then convalesce to the rest of the war. His life after that will never be the same. His pension file indicates that he suffers traumatic head injury from this wound. He is addicted to barbiturates. He can't sleep. And eventually, late in life, he will walk out the door one day and never return to his family. He keeps in touch with his son, but his wife never sees him again. He just leaves the family and disappears, essentially. Samuel Webster, the man who shot Lamar, will join the 7th New Hampshire Infantry after this. He'll be promoted to sergeant, and then he will join the 1st New Hampshire Heavy Artillery as a lieutenant even later in the war. Webster will die of disease in February of 1864. He will not survive the war. I found this story very compelling because the same day the Battle of Manassas is raging, this incident plays out here along the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. And it really is a lesson in many respects, because we like to think of the Civil War sort of, in a very definitive term, North versus South, like you would find at the Battle of Manassas, for example, the Union versus the Confederacy. But up here, you have Marylanders with divided loyalties right on this border. The New Hampshire men that are on the 1st New Hampshire soldiers in this location consider this Secesh territory. The regimental history of that 1st New Hampshire Infantry was written in 1890 by a man by the name of Stephen Abbott. He says that Poolesville, which is in Maryland, which we consider a border state, they considered a dirty Secesh village. The day before this incident takes place, their brigade colonel, Charles P. Stone, who will later go on to become the fall guy for the Battle of Ball's Bluff and design the base of the Statue of Liberty, famous in his own right, Stone tries to get service in a hotel in Poolesville, the St. Charles Hotel. He's denied service, so he will appropriate the hotel, take it under martial law. So these soldiers in New Hampshire are predisposed to think of these local inhabitants as hostile to the Union, pro-Southern. Also in the regimental history, it says this incident took place on July 6th, and it refers to Lamar as a young rebel. But he really wasn't a rebel. He was a civilian at the time when he was murdered, essentially, by Webster along the railroad. So we learn these lessons about sort of the confused nature of loyalty in the border areas. You also learn that you can't trust primary sources necessarily, like this regimental history. They get several facts wrong about this. And also, it's easy to vilify these New Hampshire men, but if you think about it, they're very far from home. They're very new to the service and not properly trained, and they consider themselves to be in hostile territory, where they're probably on edge as well. Doesn't justify what Webster did, but it's very easy to vilify them until you put themselves in their shoes and what they may be experiencing. And it also shows you how war just shatters lives. You know, Lamar is killed. Greeley will go on and be seriously wounded. Webster will get sick and die. The men that joined the Confederacy, some of them are captured, get very ill out of this one small incident. We originally found research that indicated that Lamar was buried in Burkittsville, near where we were earlier, but no, he's buried in this very obscure, overgrown cemetery, and we managed to track down his gravestone and unbelievably found it here. And you can't read it, but it says Samuel Calvin Lamar, I can't read that actually, his birth date.
Born September 12th,
September
1841.
1841. And then down below it says died July 21st, 1861, the same day as the Battle of First Manassas. You can't really read it. Up here is the remnants of a weeping willow carved into this stone, which symbolized grief and was a very common embellishment on headstones of the 1860s period. So you never know where you're going to find bits and pieces of the Civil War, or the stories that you put together when you buy a simple document like this and begin to doing research. And I want to actually take the time to thank Melissa, who did a lot of research on this to help me, and my wife Heidi, who did a lot of research as well, finding out what happened to these Confederate men. It's very interesting. And John Crown, they tried to find, he was drafted by the Union Army, and we found his draft roll in Frederick, and it says next to his name, in the service of the rebel army. So again, just an interesting microcosm here of these lives and the tragedy that befell Samuel Calvin Lamar, a young 19-year-old, probably had a little too much to drink and didn't really expect to die on that hot day along the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. This is Dana Shoaf and Melissa Wynn signing off for today. I hope you've enjoyed our first Monday broadcast. I don't know if we can ever get you into an abandoned graveyard again through our detective work, but December 2nd will be our next First Monday broadcast, and we will be doing those from around Winchester, Virginia. Is there anyone that would like to say hi to us, Melissa?
Sure, we can say hi to Craig Swain, Mike Del Placido, Kim O'Connell, Louis Acevedo from Jacksonville, John Grady, and Rhiannon Kaiser is back as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone that Melissa just mentioned and everyone else that is tuned in. We really appreciate you watching, and we enjoy bringing these to you. Have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you December 2nd.